You're listening to a podcast of The Mojo with Steph Renee. Weekdays 10 a.m. till noon on 900 AM WURD.com.
What's this on the line? We've really special guest today. This is the man who's responsible for putting Pam Grier on the map.
Yes.
First with the Big Dollhouse, which was a women in prison movie shot in the Philippines. Pam Grier that was like her first talking role.
Right.
And then from that, she became a superstar with two films, Coffee, which we heard the theme song from, and Foxy Brown, which also had a fantastic theme song.
And has a hip hop woman who named herself after it. The influence of these things is huge. And Pam Grier was so beautiful and was still kicking ass. That's why I loved her. I was like, she was like the Black Charlie's Angel, and way cooler.
Exactly. So with the Sunline is the man who conceived, who wrote and directed Foxy Brown and Coffee, as well as two other movies which have just come out on Blu-ray, Spider Baby and Pit Stop, Mr. Jack Hill.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Hill, welcome to WURD.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thanks for the little plug there. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, really excited to have you on the air. I mean, we're Philly's black-owned talk radio station. So I do want to talk about Spider Baby and Pit Stop, but But while we have the time, I gotta ask you, how did these movies come about, Coffee and Foxy Brown?
Yeah, well, I had pretty much success with the two pictures you mentioned before, the Big Dollhouse, Big Rotation, and AIP. You're probably familiar with AIP. It was a little mini studio there that was making a lot of so-called blaxploitation films, although that word didn't exist at that time yet. And so they gave me a call to my agent actually, and had me come in and talked to the head of production there, Larry Gordon, and he said he wanted to do a black woman's revenge movie. And my heart kind of fell at the time because I really didn't think I really knew how to do anything like that. And but the funny thing was that the reason he wanted to do this in such a rush was because he said they had made a deal to do a movie called Cleopatra Jones with another producer, and at the last minute, this producer had gotten a better deal with Warner Brothers, so he took the project to Warner Brothers, and head of production AIP was pissed off, so he wanted to get something out to compete with it. So I went off and I came up with a story and came back, and he liked it. So I wrote the script and I insisted on Pam Grier. They weren't really sure they wanted her because there were some other actresses they thought might be good, and I said she's the only actress who can do this. So I really insisted on it. So
nice.
We got to, and she had done a couple of other pictures in the meantime and looked good. So I got to do it. So I worked with Pam, and she gave me a lot of really good ideas, and I wrote the character really especially for her. And the movie opened. It was a big hit, and we actually did better than the big Warner Brother production of Cleopatra Jones. So it was, so it was kind of.
So I mean, one of the things, Tarantino loves you. He considers you one of the greatest American directors of all time, I think. And
wait,
Quentin Tarantino.
Oh yeah. Well, Quentin. How can you not like a guy who says things like that?
But I think one of the reasons why your films have such a lasting value, you were sort of like an auteur for this exploitation cinema. I mean, what informed your approach?
Well, I don't know. I just tried to do what I thought was right. I did have quite a lot of how can I put it, resistance from people. Well, like AIP, they just wanted more sex and violence, and they thought that's all that they needed, and that's what they wanted. And I always really had to struggle to try to bring other values, humanity, if you want to call it that, and some humor. And I think maybe that's kind of that approach. Has made my film still going strong after all these years. When the other movies had good reviews and made me jealous, they're all forgotten. So that's kind of nice. But the thing that I really appreciated most was that the films that I made, like Coffee and Foxy Brown, they brought in what they called a crossover audience. The studio had a certain fixed budget that they figured if they got the black audience, they could make money, and they found these pictures showed that there was a big, if I can use the word, white audience for black characters and lifestyle. And so ultimately, blaxploitation, as it was later known, kind of faded out because black characters and lifestyles became part of mainstream film. So if I made any little contribution to that happening, I'm very happy.
Well, let's talk about that, too, because you come from, you might not characterize it as this, but you come from a Hollywood family. You grew up in L.A., you grew up around the film industry. And so the idea of being able to sort of navigate that space and be able to bring this kind of story to the forefront and create this audience for it was really necessary at that time when, you know, we're in a space now comparatively here in 2015 where people are looking for something to laugh at and cheer for on the screen, I think much more often than we have gotten it in recent history.
Well, that may be true. Let me just say that when I went to the screening, in a theater in Pasadena in a black neighborhood, pardon me for putting it that way, but that's the way it was.
Yeah.
With a black audience, and I was just, to see how the audience was taking it, I was just absolutely, I wouldn't say appalled, but I was just amazed. There were people in the audience were standing up and screaming back at the movie, and that's what I call a catharsis, as they would have said in ancient Greece, I guess, of some kind. But it was really, really shocking to see, what I thought was just a pretty good movie was just having such a powerful effect on people. And it's no wonder they told all their friends to go see it.
Well, that's a great, you got a chance to experience firsthand, and I'm glad to know that you were able to sit there and watch people's reaction in that way to what some of us nowadays, we make decisions about which movies we see where for that very phenomenon that you're describing. Sometimes those movies are best seen with people who are going to talk back to the screen and cheer out loud and yell at the screen, just all of those kind of dynamics that make it that much more of an experience when we're sitting in the seats.
Yeah, well, it was very gratifying because that's what it does. And as a theater person, as a playwright or whatever you want to call it, to see an audience really, really get into your thing, that was really quite gratifying.
Yeah, so we're talking with writer-director Jack Hill, whose 4 of his movies have just been re-released on Blu-ray, remastered from original elements through Arrow Films and through Olive Films. And Real Black is giving away a full set of these 4 movies, Spider Baby, Pit Stop, Foxy Brown, and Coffee, right now on realblack.com, REELBLACK.com. Can you share some stories about making Foxy Brown or Coffee?
Yeah, I don't know. There's not much in the way of stories other than by sort of the conflict with the studio. It was well. I had such conflicts that basically when we did Foxy Brown and finally was released in the theaters, the studio didn't invite me to a screening. I had to go see the picture and buy a ticket in the theater to see it.
Wow.
What?
And yeah, right. And it turned out to be a big hit. And but there was really, I got to say this, there's really the stories I want to tell. There's really not much other than what might interest you folks. Is that the people in the studio, they all thought they just wanted to get this done so they could get on to better things, and it was really unconscious racism. Or you could just feel it in the air all the time. And and I went to, let me tell you this, this is a good one. When after Coffee came out, it was such a big hit, I got a call from another producer who thought they'd like to try making a black film. And I sat down and he said, what do they like? They meaning you know who, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do they? He says, I know they like to laugh. He says, I know the picture shouldn't be too good.
Wow.
That was the end of that interview. That was the attitude. It was really a struggle against that kind of unconscious racism and people that just had nothing but contempt for the work they were doing. And now you can understand how when these pictures are talked about as classics, that makes me feel better.
Exactly.
That's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, put it in perspective. How do you look back at those years? Like you started out at USC with Roger Corman and photographed and wrote.
UCLA.
UCLA, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
UCLA with Roger Corman.
Bad word there, yeah.
Pardon me.
Yeah, okay, you're forgiven.
But and worked up through the ranks with Roger Corman. I mean, but for the most part, you're the author of exploitation cinema. I mean, did you? I mean, what was it like coming through that time period? Were those the only opportunities for you, or?
Well, yeah, and the more success you have, the success you have, even more so than as an actor. As a writer and director, you get stereotyped, that kind of film. And sometimes the more successful your film is, the more you get stereotyped into that. And I had friends that were doing the same kind of movies, and they made some pictures that got sort of really good reviews, but flopped at the box office, and they went on to do mainstream movies. But I was just really having fun, and one good thing about those kind of films, exploitation films, is that in order to compete with mainstream films, you had to come up with ideas, and ideas that the major studios wouldn't touch, and that was really, really fun. And kind of like, I grew up. My dad worked for Warner Brothers, and I kind of grew up with the Warner Brothers movies of the '40s. And they had a certain kind of sense of humor and kind of style to them because they were made in low budgets, and they had to compete with studios like MGM, and they had to compete with good ideas, and I guess that's kind of where it came from.
Fantastic.
Got you. Well, we've got to take a quick break, but we hope you hang on the line so we can ask you a few more questions about, this period in history and give people more insight into the creation of these wonderful films.
Sure, you got it.
Excellent. You are listening to Real Black Radio, part of the Mojo, here on 900 AM WURD, and we will return with our conversation with writer-director Jack Hill after this. From the album Street Songs, that is punk, funk, late great genius Rick James with a song called Ghetto Life. So you might want to call that sort of the second incarnation of the music that came from films like Foxy Brown and Coffee, where we're embracing the idea that what's happening on screen or what's happening in the neighborhoods is cinematic, is dramatic, and something that we can, do a whole lot of melodic storytelling about in a really amazing way. And so, Street Songs was one of the soundtracks of my youth.
Okay.
Yes, and so right along with other major black film soundtracks, Street Songs is definitely right up there with that. This is Stephanie Renee and Mike D, part of Real Black Radio here on 900 AM WURD, and we're continuing our conversation with writer, director, filmmaker Jack Hill.
Yeah. So, so we're really excited. Now, Arrow Films, they're sort of doing a reissue project with you. It's a UK-based video label, and they have acquired the rights to of all four of the films that we're talking about, Coffee, Foxy Brown, Spider Baby, and Pit Stop for the UK, but only in the US are the official director-approved editions being released by music video distributors. So if you have a multi-region player, you may want to get the European editions of Coffee and Foxy Brown. But again, if you go to realblack.com, we are giving away a full set of the Blu-rays. So going back to the earlier work, Mr. Hill, I guess my favorite of these is Pit Stop. It's a movie I had never really heard of until I had a chance to see this restoration. Can you talk a little bit about making that one?
Yeah. It's I think it was a really, really good movie. And the problem we had with it commercially was that we had to shoot in black and white because we have all this nighttime racing, which I just loved in black and white with the smoke and the sparks and the fire and all this, and the lights, and you could not shoot that in color at the time. And but by the time the film came out, we had some delays doing the sound effects, which if you see the movie and hear the sound effects, it wouldn't surprise you. And the racing motors and all that. And drive-in theaters were advertising all color policies, and the only way they would take a black and white movie is if it was paired as a second feature with a movie in color. And so it was kind of disappointing in that sense. But I'm very, very glad that it's coming back and people are seeing it now because it really is. I think it's some of my best work there. and it's kind of an art film about stock car racing, which sounds like a yeah. But so people who might like it.
Were you influenced by the French, or
by the what?
What were your influences when you went to make films like Pit Stop and Coffee? I mean, were you looking at a lot of foreign cinema at the time, or?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't call it an influence, but yeah, I was. In those days, we used to go to there was a theater called the Kabuki Theater in Hollywood there, where they showed all Japanese films that you'd never see, and I got a chance to see the films of Ozu. You're familiar with Yasujiro Ozu? He's just
yes.
a wonderful filmmaker, yeah. And and of course we went out of our way to see the French, especially the new wave, Nouvelle Vague films like Breathless and that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't call anything like that an influence now. The only influence I can mention is what I mentioned before, that the Warner Brothers movies of the 40s, they had Cagney and Bogart, whereas MGM had what, Robert Mitzi Gaynor.
Fast-paced movies, James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, those are the kind of films that I really, really grew up on.
No.
So that's, that's influence.
I was just going to ask a quick question, since we opened up your first segment with the Roy Ayers track, Coffee is the Color, that was the theme song for Coffee. Thinking about that era of films, as writer-director of the film itself, did you have any say-so, or were you looking specifically to make a relationship with an artist like Roy Ayers for the theme song for that film, or was that handled by other people within the production process?
Yeah, that was entirely done by the studio. They just hated directors. They thought directors were a nuisance that they had to put up with, and so they would. The Directors Guild, they had by contract to allow you to make a first cut, work with the editor, and then after that, they didn't even want to see you around anymore. So that was. But I must say, they certainly made very, very good choice with the music on that one. Let me just say one more thing I wanted to add. It was such a pleasure working with these wonderful black actors, players, who hardly could get a job before, little hope, and now all of a sudden they were working, and it was really a pleasure to work with these folks. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the good fortune of running into Mr. Terry Carter, who was the male lead in Foxy
really?
Brown, not too long ago. Yeah, he's doing really well. He's back in the States now. He was over in Europe for about 8 years, so.
Really? Oh, he was a really nice guy.
Yeah, really, really talented film. So you have 19 feature film credits to your name according to IMDb. Do you have a favorite film?
No. Spider Baby. I got to tell you something about Spider Baby that might interest you here. I had Mantan Moreland in there, who first time I worked with a black actor, and he was just so happy to be working. Even though it was a small thing, he just loved it, and we had such a great time with him because he was, one of my favorites from the old days when he used to do these stand-up comedy routines in movies. But the civil rights movement really put an end to his career, and he was really kind of bitter about it because nobody wanted to use black players in the kind of roles they used to be. It wasn't fashionable anymore, playing maids and servants and shoe shine and all this kind of stuff. And they didn't understand that his type of comedy was universal, and so he and a lot of the other black actors who used to do those kind of roles were just out of work. And it wasn't until the black films came in as a separate thing that ended. But it was such a sad thing that the very civil rights movement, hurt people like that, and it's really sad. So he was fun. He was great.
And the blaxploitation period, that was a very short window as well. Like you made 2 movies in a row, and then you went on to Swinging Cheerleaders and Switchblade Sisters. Any reason why you did not continue in the blaxploitation realm?
Yeah, sure. Because it just was the films that I made and some others showed the major studios that black characters and lifestyle were good business, were box office, and so basically the sort of, if I can put it this way, the need for special films like that kind of died out, and so that was that. They just weren't making them anymore.
Well, we've had a great time having you as our guest. Really an honor and a privilege to be able to spend a few moments talking with you. And once again, please look out for Coffee, Spider Baby, Foxy Brown, and Pit Stop out now on Blu-ray and Combo.
Yeah, I want to say that the guys in England did a beautiful job on those things with the extras. It's just really fine work.
Absolutely.
Yes, and that's going to make it a treat for everybody who wins this special 4-pack from Real Black and gets a chance to sit down and really take it in as well as the extras. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, my pleasure, absolutely.